in the same spirit that the Leader of the Opposition started her own debate, it would be good if I was struggling to find material to suggest that this government could do better. Unfortunately, I'm overwhelmed with material of the many failures of this government, despite its ascendant majority, despite its enormous amount of surplus, that it is failing on so many fronts, and here they are. It should be a mature government 6 years into their term, and in fact flailing around like a government that's just come into power, not dealing with issues adequately, and it's mismanagement across a number of areas. Mismanagement of key portfolio areas, as was outlined by the Leader of the Opposition, not progressing state development adequately, an ideological agenda that undermines good government decisions, questionable decisions that are not serving the public interest, and refusing. And I think this is the hallmark of this government above everything else. This McGowan, and it's not even called a Labor government anymore, you might know, members. It's not the McGowan Labor government, it's the McGowan government. So we've got a personality cult that apparently is the government these days, based purely on the Premier, who doesn't believe in Labor anymore, and clearly there are members here who don't. I'm sure there are some good ones that do, but we've got, as I say, we've got a personality quote. We've got a personality cult. Cult that is based on the Premier, the McGowan government. This McGowan government. This is the hallmark of the McGowan government, and that is an utter and total lack of transparency. An utter and total lack of transparency. I say quite confidently this is the least transparent government in the history of the state of Western Australia, and we've had some dodgy Labor governments in the past in Western Australia, but this government, its lack of transparency is absolutely profound. But if we go to the management of the key functions in this state, first and foremost, keeping people safe in relation to health. And I'm not going to go through the health failures because the Shadow Minister for Health will do that very, very adequately. But
Minister for Water, that's quite enough. Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. Minister for Water, I did have the courtesy not to interject, or I won't be interjecting on you if you do actually rise, but can I say I'd appreciate it from you. We've got so much to get through. But as I said, the member for VAS, the Shadow Minister for Health, will cover this in some detail. But this government was handed a health system with the capacity to deal with the health needs of this state, and what we've seen is a massive decline in the quality of health services offered to this state, no more exemplified than by a five-fold increase effectively in bed block causing ambulance ramping outside our hospitals. What an absolute disgrace. But as I say, I won't dwell on that. Let's go to energy, one of my favourite topics, and what a debacle. So I've never, more puffing of the chest, than we see in most places, and what an absolute debacle that this government is causing in that space. Talking about managing an energy transition, but what they're managing is chaos. And no more so, the Shepherd Review did encapsulate this, and I'm not going to go through the debate from yesterday in detail, but I will comment on it. But no more so than the quote that comes out of the Shepherd Review, where they're reviewing the data of outages. This data shows over a 4-year period a materially worsening customer outage experience trend in the CBD and rural areas with flat performance in urban areas. That was the review that the Minister initiated himself, and that was their summary, because that's what we see consistently. We see a range of problems in this area, and I do want to talk about the debate we had yesterday. I just want to put on record how disappointed I was with the contribution by the member from Swan Hills. Now, we're all used to the minister's invectives and telling everyone how clever he is and how hard he works and how no one works as hard as him. It's the same broken record we've heard. I suspect, Leader of the Opposition, we've probably heard it in this chamber for a decade or more, but nevertheless, we all know the minister's very clever and how hard he works and how no one lives up to his standard. But just sanctimonious, gratuitous indulgences by the minister in his reply. But the member for Swan Hills, now I've worked with the member for Swan Hills in the Economics and Industry Subcommittee, and I hold the ability of the member for Swan Hills in some high regard. And I was sort of just reflecting when I saw the announcement about Fiona Hick heading up as the new CEO of FMG. I thought, that's sort of in that league of capability and capacity, and instead her contribution is reduced to repeating gratuitous criticisms and insults from other people, rather than actually using her intellect and ability to actually respond meaningfully to the issues that were raised. Just gratuitous.
I'd have a debate if you actually bothered to make some intelligent points. But the fact of the matter is, it's completely vacuous.
Acting Speaker, I have a lot of material to get through.
Member for Swan Hills. Member for Swan Hills. Member for Swan Hills. You've had your say. Leader of the Liberal Party.
So a big disappointment. And what a debacle we have in energy in this state. So here we have the Minister for Energy, the Minister for Mines. What are we facing? We're facing a coal shortage for our power stations at Collie. In fact, two of them have had to be, three actual power plants have had to be switched off now for an extended period of time to buy stocks. And then we have the ludicrous situation of exporting coal jobs from Collie to the eastern states. Literally coal from Newcastle will be shipped into this state, 100,000 tonne of coal, and who knows how more that's going to go on. And as we heard, and I think by repute is likely the case, $400 a tonne. Again, the minister won't be transparent about how that's going to impact, who's going to pay for it. No mention of that. Oh, well, it's all complex because of the calorific value and the ash content. Rubbish. I've been responsible as a manager for a power station. Synergy could tell, member for Swan Hills, as I say, you're wasted on this place. Maybe you should try somewhere else.
We don't need it. The Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. What an absolute farce. That with a likely reserve of somewhere around 2 billion tonnes of coal, 300 million tonnes or so of provable mineable reserves in that place, we've got a situation of this state having to import coal from the eastern states. And then furthermore, we have this government looking at the coal closure in 2030. Now, they can dwell on the policy that our party had going into the last election, but they're in government and they've made this decision. And I do my homework on these things, and there is the people that actually use the gas have actually done an analysis of your policy and gone through. And what it shows consistently is that on days when we have no wind, with the coal-fired power station, not operating, there will be, if we're relying on gas to provide the firming capacity on those days to make up for that energy gap, it's going to be something like around 300 terajoules of gas above the capacity of the current DPNG pipeline to actually handle. So no announcement from this government around what are they doing, what are they working with the owners of that to get more looping in that network to get it down, because that's what it is, up to a 300 terajoule gap, member, and you can go away, member, in your own time, do your own modelling.
Acting Speaker. Point of order.
Member for Swan Hills, if you carry on like this, I will start calling you to order. The Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. An average shortage across those days where you have no wind and with those coal-fired power stations closed if you're providing that firming capacity with gas of around 150 terajoules, pretty well across the whole, that's the average across the whole year. It's an enormous shortfall in the gas supply, and I will be absolutely delighted for the member for Swan Hills, I assume here as the proxy for the Minister for Energy, to provide some answers on that. And we see the fragility of this system. In this chamber yesterday, we had the Minister for Energy coming into this place and saying that, and when I asked him a question about the Santos plant, or at least the reduction in output from Santos through Varanus Island, saying in this place there will be no impact. There will be no impact on customers. There will be no impact on business. What do we see? The very next day, our largest ammonia manufacturing plant in the state, which is the Yarra plant at the Borough, shut down because they don't have enough gas from Santos. That's what we see. A major industrial facility shut down because it doesn't have sufficient gas. That's the fragility of our gas network, and that is the fragility of the ability...
Member for Swan Hills, I call you to order for the first time. I have been pretty lenient with you, given that I do think that the Leader of the Liberal Party has invited some interjections from you, but I made myself clear you spoke while I was speaking last and while I was taking a point of order, and it's not acceptable. So I call you to order for the first time, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. That demonstrates the fragility. Of our system, and that is that we have constraints on the capacity, and the gas users in this state of Western Australia are extremely concerned about that, and extremely concerned about the ability to get gas down that pipeline when you are relying on that to provide the backup when there's no wind and we have no coal-fired power stations. Now, I won't go through, but look at transport under this government. So here we are, 6 years in. The only thing that's been delivered in terms of the famed Metronet project is a project that was started by the previous Liberal government, and that's the Forestfield Airport link. Otherwise, lots of announcements. If announcements were moving people around, we'd have no problems. Lots of hard hats, lots of fluoro vests, but in fact we've got a government that is simply not delivering those projects on anywhere near the time and the schedule that they should do, competing with the private sector for labour, and I don't think this was alluded to by the Leader of the Opposition, but actually out there competing with the private sector. So at a time when the private sector is struggling for labour, we've got a government coming in and pouring and making more announcements about infrastructure projects to compete with them. It's one of the reasons we can't get houses built on time. One of the reasons we can't get houses built on time. And on top of that,
Minister,
I'm not speaking.
It's all right, take a seat, Deputy Leader. Member for Burns Beach, Minister for Water, I don't need you to make up for the member for Swan Hills, so if we could just keep it down. The Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. What we have is the government competing, so on top of a program that they can't deliver now, they can't deliver, years behind, tens of millions of dollars, in fact hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, as was revealed by the Auditor General in her review of your top projects. What we have is the government announcing even more projects, and now they've got the Midland Line closure, which has already been pushed back. We know it's going to be pushed back. I can tell you it'll be gold for the next election, because you're going to have that whole corridor in chaos for the next state election, because you'll push it back and push it back, adding another project on top of it, competing even more with the private sector for labour. It is one of the primary reasons, one of the main reasons we don't have sufficient labour for those other areas. We have in relation to planning in this state. What absolute chaos! And I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the good job she did in highlighting the issues. We have a planning minister that has utterly abandoned an ordered planning framework in this state. And I'll have a little bit of chance to go through that in more detail tomorrow morning in my grievance to the Minister on this subject. But we have a process now that is utterly idiosyncratic. We have decisions made as singular decisions without any reference to ordered planning. We had the debacle of the Charles Street decision just recently, which exemplifies that more than anything else. So we've got a system designed to ingratiate the government to develop developers who want to develop whatever they want, whenever they want, but otherwise utterly abandoning local communities. Housing and homelessness, the Leader of the Opposition has already been through that and taken us through it. But what a massive disappointment. I still don't think this government has actually replaced the houses that they sold. The 1,300 social houses that they sold when they came in, the 1,300 that they sold, they still haven't replaced this far in. I'll be fascinated to hear if any members can actually confound me on that. The Common Ground project, how many times was the Common Ground project announced? I think we counted, it was some enormous number, something like 20 different announcements around it, and we know it's no closer today than it was 6 years ago. We get on then to the fascinating area of law and order, and I do want to cover this in a little bit of detail. You know, if we look at law and order, we have a police minister that comes into this chamber. He comes into this chamber and he tells us that everything's fine, everything's great. I'm going to lots of police graduations. So the Minister for Police is going to lots of police graduations. I tell you what, he must be going to quite a few resignation parties as well. Because what we've seen under this minister and what we've seen under this government are record resignations from the police force. So much so that in fact the numbers have started going down. Despite the record graduations, the numbers have actually started going down. I am not seeking interjections from this crowd. Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker.
Noted. Thank you, Leader of the Liberal Party. Yes, member from Burns Beach. Thank you.
And that's what we see under this police minister. Let's go through, facts, because you don't like facts on that side. You don't.
You make your
Members.
Can you do a point of order for that?
Member for Burns Beach, I call you for the first time.
As I said, you don't care about facts, but let's go through a few. So if we go for non-family related assaults have gone up in some suburbs, and I'm talking in some regional context here, and I'm sure the excellent new member for North West Central will cover these issues in good detail when she has the chance to do it. But in Carnarvon, those non-family related assaults have gone up by 80% in the last 12 months. Now, I've had the Minister come into this place and tell us that crime is improving. It's gone up by 80% in the last 12 months. The overall Midwest and Gascoyne region has seen non-family related assaults go up by 28% in the last 12 months, burglaries up by the same amount. Now, this horrendous TikTok craze of young people stealing cars and then putting the footage up, that's gone up by 50%, by over 50%. The number of vehicles being taken. We have a crime crisis in a good number. In fact, I would say the majority of regional centres going above Geraldton. And that is absolutely... I'd have an extension, please, Speaker.
Extension granted.
Thank you very much. It is an absolute crime crisis that is occurring in that part of the state. As my colleague, the Shadow Minister for Police, the Honourable Peter Collier, in the other place has revealed, there have been more than 400 resignations from the police force this year, and we've still got 2 months, and this was as of with 2 months to go, so we'll find out what we've got. It's almost double the attrition rate of 2021, and it's almost treble the attrition rate of 2022. And the senior officers, that's what's more concerning, is that the senior officers leaving. So in 2019, of all the officers who had served less than 1 year, only one had resigned. In 2022, 29 officers had been on the job less than a year had resigned. In terms of those officers with 6 to 10 years service, 2019, 24 had resigned. and in 2022 that had risen to 103 in that category. 10 years service or more. 2019, 37 resigned. This year, 111. That's the record of this government in police resigning. So you can talk about the graduations you're going, and I admire those young people that want to go into the police service. But clearly they are finding a culture problem there and that's what we're seeing in the number of resignations. And also everyone would know that those young officers are going to struggle to have the impact that they could have when the senior officers are leaving the force. As of June 30 this year, there were 7,007 sworn officers, which was up only 80 from the previous year. And by the 20th of September, that number had dropped by nearly 100 to 6,911. So much for the much vaunted increase in the number of police officers. And now we see the government repeating history, going out trying to get recruits from overseas. Now we hear how many people have applied. I'll be fascinated to hear how many people actually get here and how many of them can actually find someone to live when they do get here. At best we can see we're going to probably end up with a break-even situation, and that's the challenge when we hear about this new precincts legislation that's gone through, for example, that just went through the other place and will go into law, and that is no police officer to actually enforce that legislation. So I hope the Minister spends his time wisely working out how to deal with that and to deal with those criminal issues. And I do want to raise this. One of the things we do know about this police minister, he loves photos with guns, and I have discussed this with the Speaker already. But here we have the minister telling the Premier this is a gun. It was a pretty important press release that the Premier could work out what a gun was. Here we have the police minister again. He's got another gun. There he is, and here we have another one. The minister's telling us he's got another gun and telling us how gel blasters can look like guns. I think if we recorded the number of times the Minister for Police had said guns and bikies in this place, it would dominate the larger percentage of any contribution that he's made in here. But law and order, whilst those things are important, make no mistake, dealing with bikies and making sure we don't have a gun crime in this place is important. But the reality is that in the great majority of this state, we are not seeing the impact on law and order that we should. In fact, the most serious crimes in this state are up by around 20%. Under this minister, up by around 20%. So that's the record of this government. Now, and as I say, you don't like numbers, but you can have all the happy shots you like with guns, and you can have all the salacious headlines you like around bikies and the like. But that may be something that's important, but that is not dealing with the real crime issues that we face in the state of Western Australia. Now, if we look at the area of state development, and the Leader of the Opposition touched on this, but there is a complete failure here in grasping that new economy, the new hydrogen economy that we should be well down the path of. What's happened in this state? What have we had? The single largest investor in hydrogen in Australia, which is FFI, Fortescue Future Industries. Where have they had to go? Anywhere but Western Australia. Why? Because they cannot get adequate industrial land off this government. And I want to reinforce the point made by the Leader of the Opposition. The failure of this government to provide adequate industrial land is the single largest handbrake on the industrial development and future development of those industries in this state. I drove past Okajee Estate just a few weeks ago, and I think they've graded the driveway. I think they must have had some pollies driving up there for another announcement, and they couldn't get their four-wheel drives up the driveway. They graded the driveway. That's it. The much vaunted hydrogen precinct, and I hear lots of announcements about what's going to happen. And I was speaking to a proponent who was in fact one of the companies that had put their expression of interest. I said, "Are you actually thinking of doing anything in Okajee?" He said, "Well, not really, because there's just no infrastructure infrastructure there, no power connection into the Swiss, there's no gas, there's no water, there's no communications, there's nothing there, and their company can't afford it. So they want to get their foot on the ground, but the reality is until the government makes meaningful investment in that estate, nothing is going to happen there. And the government is creeping towards it. They're desperate. They were so concerned to try and score a point over our energy policy in the last election. They're desperate not to build the 330 kV line back into the Swiss, back to Three Springs. But in fact, that is one of the critical enablers that has to go ahead before that estate will be developed. And you can roll your head back all you like, member, but that is the reality. And as I say, here we are, 6 years into the term of this government, and that estate, as I say, they managed to do a partial grading of the driveway. So this government is failing on industrial development, and the critical shortage of industrial land in the Kwinana, Rockingham industrial strip, again, is a major handbrake. That is the area where most people want to build their facilities because they've got the workforce, because they've got the infrastructure, and yet the government has not freed up more land. There is an ideal opportunity to repurpose land in latitude 32 for that particular purpose. But again, we see forest future industries and others who cannot develop in this state. Now, there are some developments planned, and they're talking about the H2, the hydrogen hub, and the like, still some way off, but we are missing the boat on large-scale development of hydrogen. We should be leading the world. Instead, we're the laggard in Australia, and that is the fault of this government. We've seen appalling decisions made by this government. The shutdown of the forestry industry, 6,000 jobs down in the southwest in a critical area, 6,000 jobs depended on forestry. Oh, for God's sake.
Point of order.
Members.
Deputy Speaker.
Yes,
Once
Member
again,
Farrow.
I can't hear the leader of the party.
Member Farrow.
Thank you very much.
Members, please do not interject.
For purely ideological reasons, we had the ludicrous proposition in this chamber, the ludicrous proposition that this was somehow about dealing with climate change, when anyone who looks at the science knows that, in fact, a well-managed forest industry is the best way to get active carbon sequestration through that forest. IPCC...
Member for Belmont.
IPCC4, go and read it. I've given you the reference, go and read it, and then we can talk about it. The shutdown of the forest industry, your attack on fishers in this state, and where's that disappeared to? The bold initiative you had around managing the fisheries all of a sudden has disappeared into a puff of smoke once the fishers got active in that area. You know, you've gone through with a heap of other restrictions. The questionable decisions not serving the public interest, and we've seen a good range of those. No more so, and I'll just only be able to highlight it briefly here. The Midland Landgate sale. What an absolute disgrace, an absolute embezzlement of public money in a completely incompetent, let's hope it's incompetent, I hope it's just incompetence with the sale of that property. As every piece of information comes out on that deal, it looks worse for this government, and something this government should hang their head in shame on, something I will not forget, and I will be getting every agency I can to pursue that deal, because it is an utter waste. It is an utter waste of public money, and it's unfortunate that I just don't have time to go through all of the detail of that. We still had this ridiculous decision to move the Agriculture Department out of their offices and go and rent offices when they had a perfectly good building and perfectly good land. God knows why that decision was made, or goodness knows why that decision was made. We don't see transparency and accountability out of this government, and I think that is the ultimate failure. It is the ultimate failure of this government, and that is that this is, and I'll say it again and again, the least transparent government in the history of Western Australia. My freedom of information requests that go in typically come back almost as a black page.